After
Yeah.
your application deadlines, you're waiting for what? An interview. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the interview day, number of interviews that you received, what the interview day was like, maybe some strange or
Oh,
different
yeah.
questions that you didn't expect. Tell us a little bit about that as well.
So I'd say I probably was more of I definitely wasn't late. I think I had everything in by July, the latest, because again, I knew I was very non-traditional. I didn't want to fall beneath the cracks of, because the competition's stiff, let's just be honest. so so I applied not early, not the first week, but definitely within the first month. So like by July, all my information was in. And that's when there was the round of secondary applications. So I'm glad I had my first, like early July, everything was in because the secondaries were being requested for. And I think I had all of those back to the programs that wanted secondary information, definitely by August. Because by August, I know I had to travel, everything was in. And so, yes, the waiting game. So I actually reached a point where I was like, okay, I'm not getting an interview because slowly the rejections are coming in first. The rejections came in before any interview offers. And so in my mind, I'm like, okay. And again, remember when I applied, it was kind of like, I'm doing this for my mentor. I didn't really have my heart set on it. I was trying to protect my heart. I didn't want to be too disappointed. So I was acting hard, like, okay, well, rejections, I'm not surprised. That's how I was behaving, even though I was like, oh, please. But exterior, I was like, yeah. I'm not surprised. I'm old. I'm really non-traditional. I didn't have like the ADAT. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Making excuses for the slowly trickling in rejections with really nice emails like, sorry, but you're not the candidate we're looking for.
And that's fine. And that's fine. That
That's
is
fine.
also part of the process. You are supposed to get rejections just like you're supposed to get acceptances or invitations. It's part of the
Exactly.
process.
Part of the process. So I was like, it's okay. My family was still like, it's okay, we still love you. We still love you. I still have my team of 5. My family still cheering me on. Here's another rejection. Let's go for dinner. At least mommy tried. And I believe the day I got an interview request, I had actually been with the orthodontist. And for her, she was also now starting to get a little, discouraged too. She's like, okay, well, it's okay. We can try next year. Literally the same day. She said that to me in the morning. She's like, okay, well, there's next year. You can try next year because now it's like end of October.
Yeah.
It's like November, knock, knock. We're like, okay, it's dying down. I think the interviews end next week. Like it was one of those. So she's like, it's okay. I think you're still a great candidate. We'll just reapply next year. We'll change strategy. She's like, we'll just change the strategy. I'm like, yeah, that's fine. And in my mind, that's what we were going to do. I had accepted it. We're done. And as I'm walking somewhere in town, my phone pings and I'm like, oh, what's this message? Interview. You've been invited to.
Yeah. The ortho tooth fairy was contacting you, right?
I go running back to her office and she's with a patient. I'm like, I don't care. I like have the phone and I like waving it in her face. I got an interview. I got. And she's just like nodding, she's in the patient's mouth, like bending a wire. I'm like, oh. And of course, like I reply immediately. I'm like, I don't care. Like, you want me to fly tomorrow? I'll fly tomorrow. I will cancel all my patients. Like, what do you want? What do you want? It ended up being virtual. Yeah.
Right.
And it
So
was
you had a virtual interview and you had one virtual interview?
One interview.
Yeah.
And it was virtual, which I'm not going to lie, I was disappointed about because virtual, anything can go wrong. Internet, Wi-Fi, there's the Bermuda Triangle. I don't want my Wi-Fi to cut out,
Right.
I was like, seriously, I'll fly to you. Like, because again, we intentionally picked East Coast direct. I'm like, it's 2.5 hours. I will fly in the night before. Like, I will come. I even asked them, I was like, no, please, may I come? I wanted it to be in person, but they insisted. They're like, no. And so I'm not going to lie, that did discourage me a little bit. I was like, oh no, they've probably already selected. They're probably just giving me the interview, just like just to honor me or to honor my mentors. You know, my mentors are amazing. They're probably doing it to honor them. I was still discouraged. Even I had the interview, I was discouraged because it was virtual.
So
So
you had this virtual interview, and what were some of the questions they asked, or ones that were like, oh man, they got me on this one, or that you had to really think of, think hard, not too long, but hard to answer? Were there any tricky questions?
but you know what's funny? None of the questions were tricky. What actually ended up happening was all those things I told you about. My internet glitched. They couldn't hear me. I could barely hear them. I had to ask them to repeat their questions. Oh yeah, the interview. Yeah, I did. You see how it's easy to communicate? Like you can hear me, I can hear you. It sounds like a dialogue. My internet was choppy that day. Oh my goodness. I was like, no. Everything that I didn't want to happen is kind of happening in this interview. So I managed to get through the questions. They somehow managed to hear me. I somehow managed to hear them, but I had to like put my head to like the speakers to hear their questions. But we got through. I'm not too sure if it was painful for them as it was painful for me. I was apologizing profusely because it was just really hard to hear each other. The interview was choppy, but I was able to answer the questions as authentically as I could. And again, thankfully, I think they all had read my personal statement and had gone through my CV. So the questions per se, none of the questions were tricky. Nothing threw me off. But what did throw me off was not being able to hear each.
Yeah, the internet.
The internet that I had like, yeah. So we got through it. And I stayed on at the end because there was someone who brought us on and took us off. And I stayed on at the end to actually apologize because I was like, I don't know if it was mine but and I followed up with an email. So that was another thing, recovery, like how to recover from that. And I don't know if it impacted my ability to match or not, but I followed up literally the next day with an email, just rewording my answers or saying my answers because I was like, I don't know if they heard anything. And restated my answers from the questions that I remembered, just apologizing for the poor quality and just letting them know I still want to come to your program, despite our very awkward interview.
Despite the technical difficulties we were having with those questions that you were asking. What kind of questions did they ask? If you remember.
Why our program? Same question that you asked, like, how did you choose this program? How did you choose the programs you applied to? Why ortho? Why ortho now? And in my case, I had shared about my family in my personal statement. So that pretty much allowed them to ask like what role my family would play. And my family has been like my main supporter throughout the whole thing. So I discussed my family, my upbringing, how or why ortho, why now? It was pretty much those questions. And then experiences, how I got exposure, and just things I had done. But really, we spoke a lot about how I was a match to their program. Again, not knowing how much they heard. But I did follow up with an email the next day where thankfully, during the interview, I was able to get the names of each of the faculty, the attendings. I wrote them down and I sent them each an email.
They got a thank you
email, and sorry for the technical difficulties. Here's a quick summary about the answers I gave in case you didn't hear me. I would still love to work with you. Yeah,
that's a great tip.
On each of the faculty as well, and I was like, okay, this is where we match. Like one person really loves biomechanics, and I really want to be strong in that. I was like, I look forward to learning biomechanics from you because I really have to get strong with my wire bending and the forces. I want to be really good at that. Another one was very strong on functional appliances. I was like, okay, well, I look forward to learning more about functional appliances.
I wonder who taught you all this ways to follow up, because as you all are listening and hearing, the fortune is in the follow-up. Yes.
I mean, I had to.
In this case, right. You were forced to.
I had to,
but it's important.
I did not have a choice. A simple thank you was not going to be enough in my case. In my
Yeah.
mind, I was done. So I walked away from the interview. I cried, I sobbed, and I told my husband, well, I've tanked it. Tomorrow, when I've recovered a little bit, I'll still email them because they did make the time to interview me. I am still grateful for the opportunity. Like I interviewed, like that to me was amazing. I was like, I interviewed like that. I was like, that amazing.
So in this case, everyone listening and watching, it doesn't happen all the time, but when it does happen, it's the next step, which is you only need one interview. Even with technical difficulties.
And I wanted
due to a
I
virtual.
wanted to go out there.
Yeah. And we'll talk about that too a little bit later. You only need one, right? Especially one that you want and they want you. And again, it goes back to the questions that come from the interview. They come from where? Your application.
Yeah.
You mentioned something that I wanted to touch upon, which is your personal statement, and that there were a lot of items that you mentioned in your narrative and your personal statement that was context for them to ask questions in that interview, right? So again, this is why it's so important that at the application phase and those two documents, your CV and your personal statement, have to be spot on. That gives a narrative, gives a story, it gives a good context as to who you are, what you're about,
who are you,
why ortho, and some unique things about you, right? Because at the end of the day, yes, programs are picking residents, but the residents are who? People. They're picking people, right? They're picking people. So I'm glad you mentioned that some of the questions actually came from things that you had shared in your personal statement, and it's their opportunity to get to know you a little bit more virtually, in person via Zoom, so that's great. That's great. Next assignment is go to the next video. Go to the next video right now. Go. Love, peace, and smiles. Go to the next video. Go to the next video.